The Delmarva Group of Support of the Sudanese Revolution welcomes you to our talk, Identity Crisis in Sudan, Myth and Reality, أزمة الهوية في السودان بين الخرافة والحقيقة, by ب.فرنسيس دينق. My name is Taj Mahjoub. Joining me today to facilitate this meeting is my colleague Dr. Dian Naim. Before we begin, I would like to take a few moments to honor our patriots, mercy and forgiveness for them, urgent recovery for the wounded and injured. We hope for the return of the missing and displaced, pride and victory for the Sudanese people. Thank you all, and now I'll pass it to Dr. Dian Naim. تفضل يا دكتور ديان.
السلام عليكم ورحمة الله. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله. We welcome our honorable guest, Professor Dr. Francis Deng, and all the audience. Welcome Professor Abdullah Naim, and thank you for joining us, and we wish you the best with speedy recovery. We must mention that our plan for this to have Dr. Naim as a discussant, but because he may not have the energy for the whole, but he may actually contribute at some stage, hopefully. Dr. Francis Deng is one of the most productive and the most intelligent Sudanese scholars over history. He published 40 books. One of these books, which is related, highly relevant to the subject of the talk, I'm holding it here. I hope every Sudanese will read it one day. It should have been read a long time ago when it mattered most, before the separation of the South. But still, the hope is there that the South will come back and the Sudan will be one country eventually. The book is entitled War of Visions, Conflict of Identities in the Sudan. And Dr. Naim, he brought to my attention how beautiful is the cover page, the cover of the book. And when I looked at it, I noticed there is something written on the book here. And it reads, بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم يا أيها الناس إنا خلقناكم من ذكر وأنثى وجعلناكم شعوبا وقبائل لتعارفوا إن أكرمكم عند الله أتقاكم إن الله عليم خبير. I think it was the idea of Professor Francis Deng to put this ayat, although he's Christian, on the book because it's one of the most important ayats in the Quran that people are not, unfortunately, not following. Dr. Francis Deng has a very unique kind of history and upbringing that made him a special scholar for the Sudan. He was born 1938, I don't think he minds mentioning the year, in Abyei, from the most treasured leader of the Dinq Ngok in the region, and that's his father, Deng. And he came and did his high school and then University of Khartoum education in Khartoum. So he's fluent in Arabic, and hopefully during this he will talk also in Arabic. But after that, he graduated School of Law in Khartoum University. Then he did his master and PhD in Yale University. He's a very famous, well-accomplished international scholar, and also worked in the politics. He occupied very prestigious senior positions. He was the Minister of Foreign Affairs in Sudan. He was ambassador of Sudan to the Scandinavian countries, Canada and the United States. He was the first representative of the new south of Sudan government in the United Nations. And as I said, he published quite a lot, especially on the matter of identity and how it affects conflicts in the Sudan. He will introduce him more and more while he is talking and people getting to know him. Thank you. You can start, Dr. Francis.
Well, thank you very much for that very generous introduction. The problem with these kinds of generous introduction is one has to live up to it. I don't know whether I'll be able to do that, but I'm really honored and very pleased to participate with you in this seminar. And it is appropriate that you have the title of a revolution, because some of the ideas we are going to talk about require a revolutionary zest to change the attitudes that have prevailed and divided the country. I have to say that the topic itself is very sensitive, and it evokes emotions in both directions. Having been allowed to talk English, and yet there was a request to talk Arabic, reminds me of an anecdote I have told on a number of occasions, and I will repeat it again. For those of you who have heard me before, forgive my repetition. لما كنت في جامعة الخرطوم مشيت لمكتب الوزير سانتينو دينق أزوره. لقيته خارج من المكتب طلع، لكن لقيت مدير مكتبه أو الحقيقة مراسل. المراسل بس يتكلم معي بالإنجليزي، إنجليزي مكسر خالص. Minister no, Minister go. قلت له بالعربي يا أخي ما تحاول اللغة اللي بتعرفها في الأول، إذا ما فهموك بعدك حاول لغة ثانية. قال لي الله والله أنا آسف والله قايل لك جنوبي. في الوقت ده طبعا الجنوبيين ما كانوا معروفين بأنه بيتكلموا عربي، وحتى أنا بالرغم من أنه طبعا قريت في خرطقت ومنها لجامعة خرطوم فتعلمت عربي، لكن بالمقارنة للإنجليزي أفتكر الإنجليزي بيسمح لي التعبير يكون أدق. So if you will excuse me, I will speak Arabic English, but I will also shift from time to time to Arabic. The topic of identity, as I said before, is very critical, sensitive, emotional, because identity is what we are in the context of not only personal, but also within a social context of the family, which extends into community, in some cases like Sudan, tribe, and minna to the nation, the sense of identifying with the nation. It is both a very flexible yet rigid concept. People hold to being a particular member of a group and race, call it, or other collateral identities like religion, maybe language, and other aspects that are relevant to who you are. And it's what gives us the sense of humanity, the dignity of being a human being, and a human being in a particular social context. And it is not just simply what you are that counts or who you are. It is the significance of what you are in terms of recognition, in terms of the values you associate with, in terms of the cultural identity, and all that is related to a particular culture. It's both subjective and objective. Subjective in the sense that it is who you think you are that counts the most, not what people think you are. But what you think you are cannot be isolated from objective factors. If you think you're one thing, but what you think you are is not reflected in other ways by objective criteria, then you are living in an illusion of your own. For instance, if I think that I am white when I'm black, if it is my own illusion, it doesn't matter. But if it impacts on others, then of course it cannot be left to my own sense of who I am. It has to be tested by objective criteria. So identity has to be seen in the wider context of the social context, his family, community, and it has to be seen also as a kind of rigid sense that you hold to who you think you are, because it gives you your sense of dignity, your pride, your sense of belonging. But it's also fluid in the sense that depending on how you want to improve yourself, if opportunities for self-improvement exist, then you are flexible with what you are in order to enhance your standing. I think these concepts are very important for when we talk about Sudan. The complication of identity comes in if you think you are superior to all others, you think you are proud, your identity has exceptionalism, but then you go to a context of diversity and discover that others too see themselves as important, as unique, and maybe even superior. Then you get into a situation of stratification, hierarchy, and the element of demanding equality comes in. And this is where the clashes can take place. What actually causes conflict is not the mere fact of what we are, but the implications of what we are in a pluralistic context. In other words, management of diversity within a national framework, and I'll talk about this later, because I really travel the world with my UN mandates and all that, but it's how you manage diversity. Is it inclusive? Is it exclusive? Is it a basis for equality or for discrimination? And when there's gross discrimination, that is where conflict comes in. The demand for equality comes into the picture. These are elements of identity and the implications in terms of policy. Let us therefore go to the extent to which issues of identity create obstacles in acknowledging it, because it has implications. So you are both rigid but flexible with your identification. It's interesting that when I wrote my first book on identity called Dynamics of Identification, it was after the end of the First War. Addis Ababa was concluded. There was a regional government. And I had actually gone back to Yale for a postdoctoral dissertation or writing a book which became Dynamics of Identification. And what I was looking at, and this is where the subtitle of this seminar comes in, the title of my research was Identity, and I talked about myth and reality.
Hello?
Hello? Is anything the matter? Somebody's talking? Am I all right?
Oh, you're fine. Good.
So it was a question of the myth and reality of identity. And it was based very much on research done by former colonial district commissioners in different parts of the country, where people, different tribes of the North, particularly those who are more associated with Arabism, irrespective of what they objectively were, they created myths of themselves being Arabs, connected, of course, to Islam. And this is something that was so profound that these tribes, despite being proud of their identity as tribes, also wanted to be identified as Arabs. And there was a clear distinction between what they really were and what they claimed or wanted to be and were known as such. Now, when I wrote the book, Dynamics of Identification, and later on moved into War of Visions, and I interviewed Sudanese, I had a very interesting dichotomy of reactions. Northern Sudanese who wanted to hold to their identity as Arabs and connected with Islam were antagonized by the fact that I was investigating and challenging their sense of who they really were compared to what they thought they were. What is Sudan? Is Sudan as Arab as we say it is? Is it African? Is it mixed? And some people would say clearly, because I connected this to the old context, and I'll come to that later, of the Islamic, the slavery framework, where people were stratified on racial grounds and religious grounds and all that. Some people did not want that to be invoked. They didn't want to go back to the past, the negative aspects of the past. So, يا أخي ما تقول لنا نحن ما عرب. Who are you to tell me that I'm not an Arab if I think I'm an Arab? الجنوبيين عكس كده. Southerners would say, those people are Arabs. They think they're Arabs, irrespective of their color. Let's not be concerned about their color. It's their frame of mind. If they think they're Arabs, we will deal with them as Arabs. We are Africans. We have nothing to do with them. This is the reaction of Southerners who felt we have no crisis of identity. We know we are Africans. Then a prominent figure, and maybe I'll refrain from mentioning names, one of the leaders of the country in the north said, أنا ما عندي أي مشكلة بتاعت هويتي. I have no crisis of identity. I know I am an Arab. I am a Muslim, a leader of the Islamic group. But I recognize that there are others who are not Arabs. We have to accommodate them. Yani to him, he's being an Arab, and the country being Arab is the dominant theme. The non-Arabs are to be accommodated. Subordinate as they are, they should be given room and all that. Yani, both sides were accepting the myths of Sudan being Arab and Islamic, or North being Arab, Islamic, the South being African, and each one taking pride in that identity and dismissing having anything to do with the other side. But if we go to the roots of this problem, we will find that the evolution of the Arab identity in the North was a very interesting mix of flexibility to assimilate. If you became a Muslim, Arabic speaking, culturally Arabized, and you began to imagine that you have some Arab ancestry, you are elevated. I heard stories of people even buying identities or certification of being Arabs. At the same time, there is a negative side to it. This is the positive side. You're being assimilated flexibly. But at the same time, the other category from which you were being assimilated, who were not Arabs and who were Africans, black, maybe heathens, they were targets of slavery. Now, what happened is this group from which the slaves were captured, mostly the southern part, but particularly the south, because the marginal areas of Nuba Mountains, Blue Nile, and maybe Darfur became Arab, Islamized, even though Arab. So to some extent, that alleviated the drive of being captured as slaves. But the Southerners, who were African, were the legitimate targets of slavery. But the irony of it all is you have this complicating factor of the pride in the tribe, even in the north. يعني عندنا كلام بتقول ود قبائل مثلا. لما تقول ود قبائل تعبير فيه عزة إنك ود قبائل. وكلام بيتقال كثير يعني in the Sudanese context لما يقولوا يعني من قبيلة معينة بتفتخر بقبيلتك. The strangest thing is sometimes people say ده عربي ساكت. أنت من nomadic population maybe ما متعلم ولا ما متحضر بالصورة المطلوبة وكده. So Sudanese have this very complex mix of pride in a myth of being Arab and Muslims, pride in being members of a particular tribe with all the values of the tribe, resisting the other that you are also being assimilated into. It's a complex. Al-Ghariba, if you take the colors of Sudanese they talk about طبعا being black. You don't mention somebody is أسود لأنه this is the color of the slaves. حتى ولو you are not a slave, but if you have a color that reminds you of some origin, then that is an element for discrimination. You are Azraq, which is a form of black, but more acceptable. You are Akhdar. You are يعني أسمر. You are ذهبي. أبيض ما بنقول لأنه if you say somebody is white, this falls into a different category of نصران وكذا وكذا يعني أوروبيين أو جيبسيز ولا كذا كذا زي ما بيقولوا. So كلمني واحد دبلوماسي مصري مرة كان في السودان قال I have never been in a place where color seems so important. The Sudanese are very color conscious. لكن ما عدا كله they are very open to receptivity of being upgraded to be an Arab, whatever your color, and upgraded to be treated, even if you are black, but you are Muslim, you are accepted. وكده. أما في الجنوب عندهم عزتهم بتاعت قبائل برضو. يعني the Nilotics are known for their pride and their sense of resistance to any external assimilation. So their culture, as a reaction to being targeted as slaves, they developed a culture of resistance. And it was a culture of confrontation between those from the north capturing slaves and those fighting them. And those fighting them assimilated, ironically, they captured some Arabs in the fight. Those became assimilated into the southern tribes, to the point where today, if you go to some parts, particularly those marginal to the north, you see يعني very light-skinned Nilotic. جاي من وين؟ ما تنسى خلطة. لكن you don't recognize that. The myths became that we are pure. The north thinks they are Arab pure, the south thinks they are African pure, when there is, in fact, a lot of mixing that has taken place in history. John Garang used to focus on Funj Kingdom, Kush. وبعدين he would go into the history of mixing and would argue that in the Nile Valley, we were mixing to the point where we have ignored elements of our history that really linked us together. And he's right. When I wrote a book about Africans of Two Worlds, the title of the book, and I talked about the origin of things, the creation myth of the Nilotic world, and contact with the outside world, and then on to where we are now and the prospects for the future, the mixing that had taken place. When I wrote the book, an anthropologist at Oxford wrote a review article in which he argued that the commonalities between the Dinka myths of creation and Islam and Christianity, they said particularly Christianity, is the result of the recent missionary work in South Sudan. The people I interviewed were in their 70s, 80s, 90s. Christianity came with our generation. So how do you explain the fact that there's so much biblical tradition in the traditional belief systems of South Sudan? The answer really should be simple. It is the Nile Valley was an area where these people interacted and interfused and created on both sides influences. I remember giving a talk, Bona Malwal, who was Minister of Allah Yarhamu, Minister of Information, had a seminar about Arabs and Africans in the role of Sudan in linking the Arab and Muslim world and the Arab world and the African world and all that. And I made a presentation in which I explored this issue of the similarities of religious themes in traditional religions of South Sudan and those of the North. And I argued that it should not be surprising. Many people who have written about Nilotic religions said, if you live among the Nilotics, you feel as though you are in the age of the Old Testament, the similarities. But I said it should not be surprising because people were mixing. When later on I went to Bonner's house, I found people there, and I saw people looking a bit kind of reserved in their interaction with me. يا اخوانا اكتشفوا واحد قال ما you are reporting, you're not saying that we and the Arabs are brothers because we were linked together and we mixed up. ب.فرنسيس, you have to be sensitive about the way Southerners see this. How can you claim that we and the Arabs have anything in common? So there's this denial. Both sides have their own pride. And this is a pride which is based on assumptions of who we are instead of who we really are, what we think we are. I think this is very important because when we talk about myths and reality, if we can begin to explore reality, we may find there's a lot more in common between us than we have been made to believe we are. Now, let us go back to the genesis of how our identities evolved. And it is something that we don't need to dwell on a lot, but I think it is important to know that much of what we are today is a legacy of the past. It is true that you cannot hold generations of today to what happened many generations ago. Although there is a theme that was, I think when Sudan became independent, South Sudan was felt that they were going to be discriminated against. A British colonial officer who had lived in South Sudan, and was a strong defender of the cause of South Sudan, wrote an article in which he said or argued that the sins of the fathers shall be visited on the generations to come, meaning the ills of slavery are lingering on. And to some extent, we can say there's an element of continuity in what used to divide people and stratify people. So our conflicting identities, the colonial intervention came beginning with the Anglo-Egyptian administration to the Mahdist revolution. It reinforced the identity that had evolved in North, one of assimilation, and into the Arab Islamic identity, and one of resistance, which is the Southern identity. Again, it was a mixed situation because the Mahdiya, for instance, came as a liberator in the whole country. And in some of my work, there are hymns, Diinq hymns, in which the Mahdi is hailed as the son of Diinq, which is a spirit of the Diinq. Mahdi, the son of Diinq, and it is to Mahdi we look for salvation, redemption. So the irony is the Mahdiya, which in a sense reinforced the whole idea of slavery and slave raids to the south, was seen also by Southerners to begin with as liberating the country as a whole from slavery, until, of course, slavery came and people began to react against the Mahdiya. In my own family, and this is a different story, my great-great-grandfather went to meet the Mahdi, and through him, he relieved or he rescued many of the slaves, and the Mahdi gave him a spear as a kind of symbol of his religious position. Went back, Mahdi even gave him some ideas on how to run the tribe. That, of course, did not continue because of the conflicts that later emerged. But you can see the way the country was mixing in a manner that distorted realities and we live by certain myths, so that even the Mahdiya, which was the liberator of the whole country, became associated also with slavery and resisted, even though at first it was welcomed. Then came the British. And the British again abolished slavery, but not suddenly. They allowed some room. They even thought of something called domestic slavery, which was a form of service. And they labeled it in such a way that while slavery was abolished, certain slavery-like practices were tolerated. So the legacy of the past began to continue on and on, yani making a jump where we have gone now compared to where we were when we were children is worlds apart, and I'll come to that. So that in the Sudan, you still refer to people as slaves. And I always say the irony is that those who had escaped slavery, those who had fought slavery and remained in the South are being referred to as slaves. Whereas those who had been actually captured and assimilated so that there are elements of slave within their identity see themselves as the masters. Again, we have a mix of myths and realities at work here. Again, in the Sudan, despite the exceptions of people of all colors, and there's a degree of equality if you are a Muslim, there's also an element of discrimination. One of the people I interviewed said in the Sudan, the word asl is very important. Asl means purity, origin. And this man that I was interviewing was quite black. But he said being black in the North, to be called black or identified in a color that is associated, means that you are tainted, you're not pure. And that being pure is a very important concept among the Northern Sudanese. That's all Lono black. Anyway, then this notion of continuity of the legacy of slavery in the way people are labeled, sometimes even treated, mixed with a lot of liberal way of accommodating people. If you are assimilated into Arab culture, if you are a Muslim, you are accepted, all that. And yet there's this lingering notion of being of slave origin. And the opposite is true in the South. Southerners themselves, African, of course, is a new concept, but as tribes with pride and seeing the other side in negative terms. So the British abolished slavery, kept the two parts of the country apart, and you know the Southern policy, until close to independence. 1947, that's when they changed the policy towards unification. And the South voted for independence because they were promised that the demand for federation would be given serious consideration. One of the many agreements that was to be dishonored, according to Abelier, too many agreements dishonored. Anyway, when Sudanization came, and most of the posts that were occupied by the colonialists went to the north, only 3 or 4 very junior administrative positions went to the south, and rumors began to spread in South Sudan that independence was going to lead back to the old days of slavery. And that was the root of the 1955 civil war that started in the South and continued for 17 years. And it was ended, as you know, by the Addis Ababa Agreement, which granted the South regional autonomy. That was when I wrote the book, Dynamics of Identification. I had gone back to Yale, as I said, and I was appointed just as I was in the midst of my research. And I ended the research, but put the book together and called it Dynamics of Identification, a basis for national integration in Sudan. And the argument was that the autonomy agreement created a framework where Southerners and Northerners would begin to interact, know one another, and understand the commonalities, the challenges of creating one nation, and would gradually move towards an integrated national identity, where color, race, all those things would no longer count. We would be citizens. That was the thesis. And I published that book just as I was newly appointed ambassador. And then when Addis Ababa came, which was negotiated by the African Union, led by Emperor at that time it was Organization of African Unity, and Emperor Haile Selassie hosted the meeting that led to the agreement. Mansour Khalid, who was the Minister of Foreign Affairs, asked me to write a book that the President Nemeri would give to be dedicated to the African leaders as appreciation for their role in bringing about the Addis Ababa Agreement. I was given 2 young diplomats to work with me, and within an amazingly short time, we were able to produce a book which was titled Peace and Unity in the Sudan, an African Achievement. Nemeri handed over to dedicated to his colleagues in appreciation for their role. The irony is that book has many elements of my dynamics of identification in it. A positive interpretation of the Addis Ababa Agreement as a first step towards an integrated nation, but allowing time for us to get to know one another and interact peacefully towards a unified nation. I insisted that the book be read and validated as reflecting the policy of the country. It was read by a number of people, including Abel Alier actually, and some people from North, intellectuals, scholars, and it was endorsed as reflecting the policy of the country. And I have to say in passing, the book was well received, very well received, but disappeared. It was published by Khartoum University Press, and after a while, you couldn't find it. I don't know whether somebody bought all the copies and got rid of them, because the vision of the book, in many ways, is a vision of New Sudan. I got to know John Garang later, and the vision of New Sudan evolved, and it had a lot in common. Anyway, the first war ended with the abrogation by Nemeri. And interestingly enough, and I'm sorry to be going back to many personal anecdotes, but I think they are relevant. When South Sudan began to assert itself, and there was a lot of talk about confrontation coming up, especially when the oil was found and the refinery was to be done in the north, and Southerners began to feel their oil was being taken away. Then came the Jonglei Canal. And I was with Nemeri on a visit. We're in Tanzania. One evening, we were alone, sitting outside, and Nemeri began to say, "Can you believe these Southerners are beginning to be critical of me, who gave them the Addis Ababa Agreement? I am going to lift my hands up, and I'll see where they will take their autonomy if I don't give them the kind of support that I'm giving them." And I pleaded with them, "Mr. President, this is your biggest achievement. You cannot say you're lifting your hands up, the South. You have to make it succeed." Alehan, we discussed the matter, and then to my surprise, or not so much to my surprise, he told me something. He said, "Do you know that Joseph Lago and the Equatorians want me to abrogate the agreement and to divide the South into 3 different regions, and I'm resisting it." But then suddenly, in a meeting of the Socialist Union, Nemeri declared, "There is a suggestion of dividing the South. into 3 regions. And I want this to be discussed. This is an idea that has come up. Let it be discussed. I'm sure Joseph Lago was surprised that what he might have said years back and forgotten in a casual conversation was now picked up. And he was quite happy that it had now become recognized as something for discussion. That was the roots of what began to divide the South. But that was a step towards Nimeri undoing the Addis Ababa agreement. He abrogated the agreement. And actually, interestingly enough, initially he wanted the autonomy arrangement of the South to be extended to the North. So he formed a committee led by Abel Elier to discuss ways in which the autonomy arrangement of the South be extended to the North. There was a strong resistance in the North to breaking up the North into regions. But Abel Elier chaired this committee, and I was a member of the committee. And I remember one day while we were having the committee, Nimeri came in and started addressing the committee. He said, why are people afraid of autonomy? الحق يقال لله. Right? The truth be said to God. When we accepted the Addis Ababa agreement, we did not expect it to last. We thought we should let the South Sudanese put down their arms 2, 3 years, 4, and tear up the agreement. But it has succeeded in bringing peace to the country. And the South is now for unity. So why are people afraid? And I could not believe it, because later on, I asked some of my colleagues who had been part of the negotiations in Addis Ababa, and of course they were dismissive of it. But what it meant was that the Addis Ababa agreement was not actually intended to last. It was just a ploy. And what Abel Elier calls too many agreements dishonored. So Nimeri misjudged the South. He thought that with South now disarmed, with the North having the Islamic and traditional sectarian parties becoming the threat, he undid the Addis Ababa agreement, thinking that that the South would not rebel again. But he was wrong, of course. Anyway, the South began to be divided based on what Nimeri had injected, that separation within the South. And that created a rift among Southerners that has continued to this day as a unity of South Sudan. Oh, I can't believe my time is, I was told to feel free to talk for as long as I want.
To feel free.
Okay, time is running. But anyway, let me say, the Second War began. But this time, instead of the First War vision, the fighting for secession of the South, which Lagos said when the peace agreement was reached, he said, all I wanted was to be recognized as an equal. Separation was something I did because I was not being given the right to be a citizen of equality. Okay, the vision that the Second War stipulated was not secession, but a new Sudan of inclusivity, equality, and dignity for all without discrimination on any ground. Interestingly enough, this is largely attributed to John Garang. And John Garang was a scholar soldier who had very profound ideas about the nation. He saw the linkages, historical linkages between the North and the South. He dug into it, even claiming that his village was the Garden of Eden. And so many names in the Bible, and linked them to names of the Nilotic tribes. So his vision was a very pragmatic, idealistic, linking idealism with realism. He wanted a new Sudan of equality. He even used to say, we are enriched by our differences. He said, I wish I spoke Arabic well, because Arabic has become the language of the nation. Religion, Islam, is part of the identity of the nation. We should embrace them all and feel enriched by these diversities. But that was John Garang. Southerners generally did not agree with that vision. They only took what Garang was saying as a clever ploy to neutralize those who are opposed to secession and to gain support from those who are for a new Sudan based on equality and all that. I remember once saying to him, why is it that when I talk about a new Sudan united, an identity that is embracing, Southerners see me as betraying their cause? When you say it, Southerners see you as a hero. What's the difference? And he said, the difference is you say it only by word. I back it with arms. And later on, and again, I can be distracted by details, but later on, Garang was pragmatically dealing with Northern Sudanese leaders. He dealt with sectarian leaders, he signed agreements with them, dealt with Islamists, and all in all, fighting for a new Sudan, but at the same time, fighting for secession. Pleasing Southerners that, look, when I succeed in liberating the whole country and you don't want to be there, you want to leave, okay. Those who want to join Sudan with me will go. Those who want to remain in South will remain. But if you do remain behind, and I'm fighting to liberate the whole country, will I go alone without you? Of course, I will back you. So Garang, I could not swear that Garang was 100% unionist or was 100% separatist. He was both in a very idealistic, realistic, pragmatic way. And he said to me once, if we want to be independent, nobody's going to give it to you. You have to fight for it. We have to squeeze the North to vomit us out, the way he put it. Let's squeeze them to. So involved in promoting a vision of one country, two systems. And for me, this was a task force created by the Center for International and Strategic Studies in Washington. And it's a long story, but the short of it is I persuaded them we have to reconcile the irreconcilable, the vision of unity and the secessionist vision. We have to make possible the impossible. And the way to do it is, if the North wants to be Arab Islam, let it be. If the South wants to be African Christian, and what, let it be. But let them be within the unity of the country. For a period, one country, two systems. And my idea was to go back to the original idea of the dynamics of identification, that the interim period be a period of getting to know you, of interacting, of moving towards a unified national identity. Obviously, it didn't happen because we failed to create the unity of the country. We failed to create conditions for unity. I remember when I went, and again, that's a long story, I went to see Bashir in prison. In a way, it was a fulfillment of having allowed me to go and visit Sadiq al-Mahdi and his government in prison. And so to fulfill what I more or less agreed to, because Bakri, when he took me to see Sadiq in prison, he said, this is an investment into the future, ya Dictor. لما يجي وقتنا تزورنا. وقتهم جمع 30 سنة. And I decided to honor, although it was not a formal commitment, but I took it as a kind of sacred duty. So I asked Bashir to go and see, I asked Bashir Burhan to go and see Bashir in prison. And I decided, instead of just courtesy call, I would challenge them. And so when I met Bashir, and then later on Bakri, I asked them, I said, to take power by force and to govern by military force, by armed force, is not a simple thing. It's a big adventure. It's it's a real risk. Why did you do it? What was your vision? And the first thing he said to me, they liked the question, both of them. And he said, the country had been going on in cycles and cycles. And I decided to end the war, even if it means South Sudan separating. And that is what happened. That's what I did. The first thing I announced was the right of South Sudan to secession, which means he was not thinking of a framework of unity. He was thinking of a framework in which the South would be accommodated, but if the South doesn't want, let it go. Unity was not a framework because the base of his government was not something that would accommodate diversity and equality. Anyway, but despite the separation, I was actually asked by the UN Information Office in Khartoum as the referendum date was coming. And I had a talk to see whether it was possible to save the unity of the country. At first, I somewhat, I tried to excuse myself because I thought it was too late. But again, they persuaded me that I should go even if I say it was too late. So I went and I made that argument, but I ended by saying, but if we want to preserve the unity of the country, then we must act fast to create conditions of what, instead of one country, two systems, let us make it one country, multiple systems, so that each of the regions of the country, east, west, north, and the new south, Nuba Mountains and all that, and the center be self-governing within a framework of national unity. Of course, that didn't happen. The South became independent. But then I wrote a book actually called At the Brink, in which I made this argument. But when Sudan became independent, I wrote another book called Bound by Conflict, meaning even though the two countries are separated, they're still connected negatively by internal conflicts that spill overboard to create a link, but a negative link. And the challenge was to turn being bound by conflict into being bonded by solutions, helping one another to find solutions internally, and then cooperate to solve problems in both countries and create a new framework of peace in both countries that can be a basis for coming back together to some kind of association and some kind of reunification. So let me jump. I would like to end really to have a conversation and leave many things out of what I was going to say. Let me jump to say that what is happening today to me is a continuation of unfinished job. Because the independence of the South came at a time when the vision of New Sudan had already inspired many areas of the country in the north, Nuba Mountains, southern Blue Nile, and even Darfur. In the early 2013, I think, when the war in Darfur started, Jan Eliasson, who was the UN Special Envoy on Darfur, and who was also Undersecretary, then was you are isolating Darfur when in fact what is happening in Darfur is an extension of what had begun in the south and began to move to the north, Nuba Mountains. Eventually, we have to find a comprehensive solution. The Department of Defense was also holding meetings about Darfur, to which I was invited. Everyone was talking about practical ways of getting humanitarian assistance to Darfur and protecting civilians and all that. And my voice, which was a lone voice, I would say, what you're doing, I cannot challenge it, but you're missing something. Darfur is part of what has been going on in the country, and that began in the South. We must find a comprehensive solution. Now, a few people appreciated that, but the general reaction, even by Jan Elias, this would complicate matters. It becomes too big and difficult to manage. So they wanted to isolate Darfur because it was more manageable. But of course, you couldn't solve the problems at Darfur in isolation and all that. So let's jump into saying, as far as I'm concerned, building on these themes, and there's a lot more one can say, but building on these themes, I can say that what is happening now in Sudan, I believe, is an extension of unfinished job, an extension of a vision that has inspired the nation to search for itself. And although the South has gone, the challenge has moved to the North. War, despite all the complications, the war is a nation in painful search for its identity. Now, it is true that we say the two generals are usually the ones mentioned, but they're not alone. They have constituencies. What is complicating matters is, although Sudan has always been linked to external forces, particularly the Arab Muslim world, now many other factors have come in. The country is also in search of democracy. Civilian role is rising. The demand for democracy is rising. But you know, if we come to think of it, it is the war that was raging in the South that led to changing between civilians, and Aboud was handed over power by the general Umar party leader who felt that they were going to lose the elections. So he handed over power to Aboud. Aboud failed to find the solution to some problems. Civilians came. Again, the civilian government failed to find a solution. So Nemeri, working with the Communist Party, came and failed again to find a solution. When Bashir came and Turabi was in prison for a short time, more of a show, and I met him in prison as he was coming from what was artificial, isolated, solitary confinement. And I said to him, "Ya Ustaz, do you know that you're being accused of masterminding this revolution?" And he said, "We had nothing to do with it. But frankly, these soldiers, I sympathize with what they're doing because the country cannot keep going on in cycles." When later on he came to Washington and I hosted a function for him, and I asked him, "You said you had nothing to do with it, but now you are the leader, the spiritual leader of this coup. What happened?" And he said, "The soldiers did what we could not do. They are implementing our agenda, the Islamic agenda, which we are not able to do democratically." So it's a complicated picture. Civilians call on dictators, then civilians rise up against dictators. We are searching for a common ground. I believe what we need to do, you don't go to war and kill and risk being killed without a cause. The interesting thing is the more the New Sudan vision has been consolidated and promoted, the more the old establishment feels threatened and challenged. So the result of progress that we are making is ironically also creating a force of resistance and a force that is for a continuation of the status quo, the old establishment. Then comes in other factors. Sudan has always been connected to external factors, but now external factors have come back with a vengeance. Divided among themselves, the Arab world, a quest also for resources of the country, ideological factors come in, geopolitics come in. Africa feels somewhat isolated. Africa has always been marginal in all this, despite the role of being African being so prominent. Africans have only been marginally involved in the organization, AU, IGAD, and all that, but no prominent role the way the Arab world has been playing in Sudan. So what do? Let me just end by saying, and I can relate identity crisis as a global phenomenon in which many countries in Africa and the world are struggling with, and I found this in my UN work when I traveled around the world and found nations that had internal displacement and the challenge of genocide are acutely divided by identity. But let me say, by way of concluding so that we start the conversation, I think we have to be inclusive. You cannot have a major faction of the country being dismissed. These are the Islamists who have governed by 30 years, for 30 years, dictating. There's no room for them. Nor can you say, these are, what you call, most of them are even Murtazaqa from the African countries and being driven, these are rebels and what have you, no room for them. No, we have to create a framework where by and large, all the Sunnis can feel a sense of belonging. All the political parties have a certain element of Islamic agenda with them. Surah Dahab said to me, ما تسمع كلام الناس ساكت. ما في زعيم مسلم بيقدر يفصل الدين من الدولة. نميري دخلنا في ورطة بتاعت الشريعة. Even travel الناس بتتكلم عنه is not as extreme as some people who are now arguing against him. So يا جماعة, let us accept that there will be room for everybody, but let us live and let live. Let's see, how can we unify the country? Do we want the Sudan to remain united? Yes. On what basis can you unite the country? Can you accept one religion, one culture, one ethnicity to rule the country? Of course not. That cannot be a basis for unity. Can we find a common ground to which all the Sudanese can feel a sense of belonging? And we see how do we accommodate our diversity and be enriched by diversity instead of being divided by it. And if we succeed in doing this in Sudan, we will lay a foundation for a coming back together in some kind of association with the South, because it was these discriminatory practices that marginalized groups in a manner that is unacceptable that led to the separation of the South. By the way, the same challenges exist in South Sudan. Maybe not to the same degree, but similar. So that it is also an explosive situation. We have to find a solution within the Sudan and also within the South, and then see, is there room for a coming back together to the old beautiful map that used to be the Sudan, and that made Sudan the largest country in Africa. Sorry to be so long, but I'll stop here and hopefully stimulate some discussion.
Thank you very much. We really enjoyed every minute of it, and I wish if you could continue, but always there is already several points raised in the chat. If you have time, look in the chat.
Absolutely.
Questions and some discussions.
Sure.
And we leave the floor open for questions and any contributions. But I don't know if Dr. Naim, Professor Naim, do you have the energy to make a few minutes comments?
I hope so.
I think, do I have the mic? Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi ta'ala wa barakatuh. Actually, I'm feeling quite weak. I don't think I can make a contribution at this point, but inshallah later on, in light of the other discussion, I may be able to make some comments.
Okay.
Excuse me, it is just a medical situation that I have to cope with. Thank you.
Children, feel well.
Thank you. So once again, thank you very much, Dr. Francis Dieng, for this very interesting talk. I'm glad that you managed to bring it to the current issue. At the end, you focused the talk about what is happening now, and you moved for what should happen in the future as a solution for both South Sudan, North Sudan, and the Big Sudan. I am focused with the actual of the myth and reality of identity. And I just would like to make a little bit of contributions, coming from biologist background, reading population genetics, reading evolution of human, etc. There is some colleagues in the Sudan that made a lot of contributions. Hopefully, one day we are going to hold a special event for Professor Muntasir Tayyib Ibrahim and all his associates, that they contributed a lot by working on the genetics of the human populations of the Sudan in relation to other African populations and Middle Eastern populations. But before even that, Sudanese study, a lot of this, when we come to talk about myth, the myth is coming from assumptions. And because people, they like just to think what they think is more logical in front of them. And when they see the colors of pale skin colors, they immediately think that these Arabs came and they just spread that color of the skin all over Sudan, and they mix with the local tribes. And they go and say mother's African and father Arabic. One thing to be corrected about that assumption, the evolution of the gene that gave the pale color of the skin happened inside Africa. And it happened in the northern part of Africa. So the color of the skin, of pale skin, is an actual African color. That generalization of black is the color of Africa, as if the pale skin or the white skin, that's not true, actually, if you look at the real population genetics, and that's well-known facts. And the migration of the pale skin color to Europe, Asia, became successful because of some adaptations that were comfort with vitamin D, assimilation, etc. So this, if people realize this, they would know that it's not necessarily to have that pale skin to be coming from Arabic origin. And if they look just across their boundary to the nearest countries of Ethiopia, for example, they will see the same color. And they will see the same color within the Sudan in the Nubian tribes. Actually, the most pale skin colors in the Sudan is found in the Nubian tribes, who speak the Nubian language, and they are not claiming to have Arab descendants. So that myth is definitely coming from this kind of assumptions, which are not well founded, but who can educate the whole population about it. The reality is that Sudanese are Africans, okay? All the Sudanese are Africans, but they will not admit that, or they don't like that. And maybe in the generation, people, no, there is majority of people, they believe they're Africans. That's not true for the rest of the population of the Sudan. And when you look at the first generations who laid the foundation of the Sudanese state, just in our field, and here we have Professor Suad Suleiman and Professor Safi, I think, is around also. We know that even to the extent of which part of the World Health Organization shall we belong to, they insisted that we have to belong to the East Mediterranean region, EMRO. So Sudanese scientists, they have all the diseases of Africa, from schistosomiasis, onco, blah, 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 all these diseases. They go to meetings in Cairo and they meet with scientists from Afghanistan and Iran, and they do not relate to the African region, which is founded in Congo. That kind of belief in the extent of the belief of that first generation about their real identity and how it affected things. I leave the floor for others to contribute. طارق بابكر.
مرحبا، شكرا جزيلا. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله. شكرا بروفيسور فرانسيس دينق. الواحد سعيد جدا بكل ما سمع، وتكاد تكون دي الفرصة الوحيدة خلال عمري الذي قارب 65 سنة أكون معك في جلسة واحدة. ودكتور ضياء عقد الموضوع زيادة، كمان جاب لها بعد وراثي واللون الأبيض جا من وين وكده، لكن وانت برضه مشيت بينا بعيد جدا، اديتنا مائدة كبيرة فيها عديد الأصناف. من الصعب الزول يحصل نفسه في مداخلة صغيرة. رجعت إلى العهد القديم وللرق ولأشياء كثيرة جدا جدا، لكن أنا أفتكر المشكلة جات من الإسلام. ما في زول مسلم زي كده بيقول المشكلة جات من الإسلام. الإسلام فيه العهد القديم وفيه العهد الجديد، ولغاية الليلة في ريفنا بتسمع حكاية دعب وبقولوها حتى على مستوى الإعلام. بعدين أنت هسه اديتنا مثال ذكرتنا به، يعني إنه زول قائد ديني مسلم زي الترابي بكذب، بتنتظر شنو تاني؟ وعندهم فقه للكذب ده. فالمشكلة أعقد من ما نتخيل، وأنا أفتكر جلسة زي دي تحتاج تكون إذا ما أسبوعية على الأقل شهرية مع زول ضليع زيك وعنده معرفة بجذور المشكلة. الشيء الثاني جبت قضية دارفور. دارفور مسلمة، ايه مشكله الشمال مع دارفور؟ وانت بتعرف ابراهيم قنباري مندوب نيجيري في الامم المتحده. ابراهيم قنباري انا قاعد في كوريا بالمناسبه بسبب انفصال جنوب السودان من 2010 ما رجعت السودان، واذا رجعت برجع الجنوب، لانه وحتى في قبل الانفصال كان عندي علاقات مع كليه اللاهوت، لانه بفتكر انه الاسلام ده مش بفهمه القديم. محمد طه هو الشخص الوحيد اللي رفع الاسلام لمستوى المسيحيه وخلى الناس ممكن ينفتحوا وقدم حلول سياسيه برضه. فابراهيم قنباري قال مشكله دارفور شنو؟ دارفور ما بلد مسلمه ومملكه اسلاميه، فيبقى المشكله في العروبه وفي الاسلام. اذا ما ديل الناس اللي يتواضعوا لا يرتفعوا لمستوى الفهم المسيحي، افتكر بتكون في مشكله كبيره جدا. شكرا جزيلا واسف للاطاله.
شكرا جزيلا. We can give another chance, but this was a long comment about that, Dr. Francis Deng.
No, I think it's in الكلام في محله. Let's listen to more voices, because there's nothing that he said I would disagree with. No.
Absolutely. Islam, بس
الصوت واضح يا دكتور ضياء؟
Yes, very clear. Thank you.
طيب شكرا جزيلا. شكرا جزيلا للفعالية الممتازة دي، ونحن دائما بنكون بغاية السعادة كل ما جلسنا إلى البروفيسور فرانسيس دينق، ونحن من مجموعة محظوظين جدا إنه بنقود إلى جوار الدكتور فرانسيس مبادرة نداء سلام السودان اللي بيرعاها وبيقودها دكتور فرانسيس دينق. واليوم أثار قضية أو أثيركم قضية في غاية الأهمية، واللي هي ما تتعلق بالهوية كواحدة من مسببات الصراع في السودان. أنا حقيقة يعني ربما دار أسأل دكتور فرانسيس طوال تاريخ السودان الحديث، وكلمة الحديث دي يعني في من يصنفها من الدولة السنارية، في من يصنفها من سقوط الدولة النوبية القديمة، في من يصنفها من استغلال السودان، كلهم بيصنفها حسب مراحل معينة. لكن عموما ظلت الهوية رهينة بأنها تعرف من خلال الهوية الإثنية أو الهوية الدينية أو الهوية الثقافية، وبالتالي ظل التباين ما بين الهويات دي وسيادة هوية على هويات أخرى تقود إلى التهميش، تقود إلى الصراع. فبينشأ صراع الهوية العربية الأفريقانية، بينشأ صراع الهوية الإسلامية غير الإسلامية، بينشأ صراع الإثنيات، العرب ضد ما عرب، والعرب ذاتهم فيما بينهم في درجات ما بين عرب، درجة أولى، درجة ثانية، درجة ثالثة، وحتى القبائل الغير عربية، ودي طبيعة الإثنيات. أنا حقيقة حابب أسمع من دكتور فرانسيس كدولة عاشت صراع زي السودان والهوية دي واحدة من مسبباته، هل نقدر نطور نموذج للهوية المدنية؟ وأنا لما أقول الهوية المدنية بقصد بها الهوية اللي بيتعامل مع الإنسان كإنسان زي ما يعني بيشير دائما البروفيسور عبد الله أحمد النعيم، الإنسان المتساوي في كل شيء، الإنسان المتساوي في الحقوق، متساوي في المواطنة، مواطنة بلا تمييز، ما في تمييز بناء على دين، ما في تمييز بناء على عرق، ما في تمييز بناء على جهة. وبالتالي نقدر بعد المآسي المرت بينا دي كلها، دائما المحن بتنتج الناس ممكن يخرجوا منها أقوياء. فهل نحن بعد الكارثة دي يا دكتور فرانسيس نقدر نطور نموذج بتاع هوية مدنية سودانية تذوب جواها كل الإثنيات كل التباينات دي، ونقدر نكون موديل لأفريقيا على اعتبار أن دي الهوية المدنية اللي بتوحد السودانيين فيما بينه ريجاردلس لأي حاجة من الهويات الثقافية المختلفة اللي أنا ذكرتها يعني. شكرا.
Thank you very much. Shall we take more, or you want to answer?
Yes, we can take more.
Okay, then Haytham.
السلام عليكم.
سلام.
عليكم السلام.
هيثم.
إشادة خاصة يعني بدكتور فرانسيس دينق ودكتور عبد الله أحمد النعيم، يعني يمكن من المتابعين لهم من بعد يعني بصورة مكثفة في كتاباتهم اللي بتتعلق بحقوق الإنسان يعني. السؤال المباشر يعني في مقولة يعني يمكن قال دكتور فرانسيس دينق في واحدة من كتبه أو في مقالاته إنه في السودان فشلنا إننا نكون like a rainbow إنه diverse in colors and strong in unity. الحديث عن الهويات وعن حروب السودان أنا بفتكر إنه هو حديث حقيقي. السودان يعني زي ما بنقرأ كلنا في الدساتير الموجودة إنه بنقول في الافتتاحية بتاعتها بتعريف السودان دولة متعددة الثقافات واللغات وكذا وكذا وكذا. التعدد ده حقيقي موجود في السودان. السودان فيه عرب فيه غير عرب فيه نوبة فيه بيجا فيه دينكا فيه كده. وأنا بفتكر إنه الدكتور جون جارنج عنده يعني كلام مهم جدا في الإطار ده، يعني لما نادى بالهوية السودانوية إنه نكون كسودانيين نعترف بالتنوع بتاعنا الموجود ده من غير استعداء لأي عنصر من عناصر الهوية سواء كانت العروبة أو الإسلام أو المسيحية أو غيرها من العناصر المختلفة. فإلى أي مدى يعني إحنا ممكن نقبل نفسنا كده، نقبل التعدد اللي عندنا ده ونعترف به ونقبل ونطور هوية سودانية. يعني يمكن المسألة اللي طرحها دكتور فرانسيس دينق اللي هي السيتيزن شيب دي، أنا بفتكر إنه ده الإطار المناسب لأنه الناس ممكن تبني عليه، يعني مسألة الحقوق والواجبات والتوزيع العادل للسلطة والثروة والعدالة والكلام ده. إلى أي مدى يمكننا تطوير الحاجة دي؟ وأخيرا يعني داير أشيد بالمجهود بتاع دكتور فرانسيس دينق اللي أنا بعتبره يعني إنه قامة فكرية سودانية، يعني ما بحصره في شمال ولا في جنوب، هو مهم للجنوب ومهم للشمال. فأنا بفتكر إنه من المهم إنه يواصل دوره ده يعني كرابط للسودان بكل اتجاهاته. شكرا جزيلا.
شكرا جزيلا. سامر.
شكرا جزيلا على الندوة دكتور فرانسيس، وشكرا على المجهود. أنا بفتكر صراحة عموما حل أي مشكلة الناس بتحتاج تمشي للروت كوز مباشرة وتخاطب جذر المشكلة بجدية كبيرة. أنا للأمانة ضد الميوعة في الحلول والطرح بتاع الحلول على النظام الجودية. يا اخوانا يا اخوان والله ما خلونا نوديها لقدام، خلونا نمشي لقدام سوا. الطريقة دي بتخلق بلد هشة، ولو ما انهارت بعد الاتفاقية هي مباشرة بتنهار في فترة قريبة. فيما اعتقد أنا في بناء الدولة المفروض بتتخطى القواعد الناس دارين يعيشوا معاها، يعيشوا في الدولة دي بيها مع بعض، حتى بعد ده بيمشوا لقدام. إذا في ناس زي الأخوان المسلمين ديل بيعتقدوا في فهمهم للدين إنه الآخر ده عبارة عن زول كافر والمفترض يقتل ومفترض تكون في كراهية مضمرة له، ومستعدين يتكلموا الكلام ده في الجوامع وفي جونا العام عموما الكلام ده متقبل. ده جو عدائي لا يمكن يبني دولة ببساطة، لا بينه وبين ناس يعني بين مسلمين وغير مسلمين، او انا قصدي اخوان المسلمين وغير المسلمين، ولا حتى بين المسلمين ان لا يؤمنوا زي انا لا يؤمن بفهم الاخوان المسلمين اصلا في الدين. ففي حاجه ثانيه برضه انت بتقولها، انه نحن we cannot eliminate الاخوان المسلمين. لا we can eliminate them. انا ما بالضروره to eliminate them يعني انا ما داير اقتلهم ولا ارشيلهم ارميهم البحر، لكن في فكر معين ما مقبول دستوريا انه يخاطب به. والكلام ده انا مشكلتي ما مع الاخوان المسلمين، حتى لو كان مثلا في مسيحي بيمشي في الكنيسه وبيستند على الانجيل مثلا، وبيحرض بالانجيل على المواطنين الثانيين مثلا، وعلى اصحاب المعتقدات الثانيه، وعلى تكفيرهم وعلى كراهيتهم وعلى كده، برضه الزول ده مفترض يكون محاسب بالدستور وبالقانون. فالموضوع اذا مشت فيها شكل ميوعه بتودينا لدوله هشه ولحلول هشه، بتكون ماشيه بس ما بتودي لقدام فيما اعتقد انا يعني. شكرا جزيلا.
افتكر منقيفة على 3 مداخلات، ولا تاخد تاني نصر الدين القاضي؟
جدا ناخذ.
نصر الدين طيب.
السلام عليكم ورحمة الله تعالى وبركاته. مسموعة؟
نعم
جدا.
التحية للمنصة دعم الثورة، والتحية للدكتور فرانسيس. سؤال الهوية طبعا بيبرز بصورة صارخة أثناء الأزمات زي ما بيأكد الدكتور فرانسيس، وأيام الحروب، لأنه بيكون عنصر للتمييز وعنصر لأخذ البنفيتس بين الناس وكذا. الاتجاه يعني بتاع خفوت سؤال الهوية، إذا اعتمدنا فعلا زي ما ردد البروفيسور فرانسيس على المواطنة، يعني المواطنة هي تكون أساس للتجمع بتاع الناس في أي زمن وفي أي مكان، فبالتالي بتخبو أسباب الصراع. هو ليه الإنسان بيصل للحتة بتاعت من أكون دي هو اللي بيخلي الزول يسأل أنا عندي امتياز وهذا عنده امتياز. فالمواطنة على أساس برضو كان في مشارك بيقول إذا اعتمدنا المدنية، أنا هنا بركز على المفهوم الأصيل للثقافة. الثقافة هي أسلوب حياة على أساس تكوين سابق. التكوين السابق بتقوم به المؤسسات في الدولة القائمة. فإذا الهوية لما تقوم على أساس ثقافي بنكون وأصلا على أرضية الدولة ذات المواطنة، يعني تكون الدولة فيها المواطن هو الأساس، يمكن نكون بنمشي مسافة بعيدة جدا لخفوت سؤال الهوية. شكرا جزيلا.
شكرا جزيلا. ندي فرصة أخيرة لعبد الله محمود ونجيك دكتور فرانسيس.
Thank you very much, Dr. Francis, for the well-informative talk. I just have a very short comment. Like, I believe that Hassan Turabi is the man responsible for everything happening in Sudan, like since South Sudan became an independent country, and they're right. And right now, what's happening in Sudan because of the Rapid Support Forces, because he was leading the Islamuddin Arabia, and he was just wanting to have people thinking that Sudan should be in the specific way that Islamic Brotherhood they want it to be. And anyone who doesn't believe like them, they must be like in a separate country. And that's all. Thank you.
Thank you. Dr. Francis Deng, you can.
شكرا. I think المداخلات كلها في محلها، وطبعا أنا متفق معاهم تماما. ما عندي أي يعني كلام مختلف من كلامه، بس عايز أركز على حاجة. يعني النظام الإقليمي في الجنوب، لما الجنوب اتفق مع الشمال على نظام autonomy, many people used to be afraid that anything you do by way of giving regions their rights will lead to secession. And even when we came up with the idea of one country, two systems, many people attacked me as separating the country. بالعكس, when we got regional autonomy, Joseph Lago, زي ما ذكرت قبل، قال I was never a secessionist. All I wanted was to be recognized and treated equally as a citizen. طيب, when the South seceded, وده كلام بيرجع لي what both يعني عصام وهيثم وحتى Abdullah said, there is already, by the way, a cultural give and take that has taken place in Sudan. If you go to South Sudan today, if you go to Juba and you listen to al-azan, كأنك في دولة إسلامية. And then you see كل المناسبات الاجتماعية وكذا كذا. There's a lot already taken from the connection with the Arab world. The impact, the cultural impact of Arabism in the Sudan has spread. I don't even know whether we call it Arab culture or Northern Sudanese culture, has spread. So I can say from a cultural point of view, the agenda of the rulers of Sudan, in a way, has succeeded. Because Sudanese, North and South, even Arabic now, you go to South Sudan, and I give lectures in a number of places in Juba, and I begin to talk English. People send me a note, يا أخي اتكلم بالعربي لأنه في كثيرين ما بيعرفوا إنجليزي. When you go to مناسبات حتى رمضان، حتى يعني أعياد، حتى البقاءات يعني funerals وكذا، there's a lot already give and take that has taken place. And even if you talk about the extent to which we have moderated discrimination, we've gone a long way. يعني what we experience as children in different parts of the country and what we now see going on, you can say with conviction that we have made a lot of progress. But the irony is, the more progress we have made, the more those who have a vested interest in the old order have entrenched themselves. So it is a case of success breeding a counter force that is threatening everything. So I think if we can at least begin to recognize that diversity is mutually enriching. يعني I can say بكل قناعة وبدون أي تردد in what I started with in my Dinka cultural background, moved into places in South Sudan, where I got to know people we used to think were cannibals, and they turn out not only to be citizens like me, but even Dinka, some of them. And then we moved to the north, people we thought were complete strangers to us. يعني أنا بحكي حاجة دائما, when the rebellion in the south started in 1955, and I and my brother Zakaria, we were in Khortaga Secondary School. Never once did anybody indicate to us hostility based on what was happening there. Yani maybe once somebody jokingly said, what are your people doing to our people? لكن when I think back now, we could have been faced with a lot of animosity. So التعارف brought people together. By the time I got to the university, يعني you lose sense of the شمالي the جنوبي. Yes, there are still those elements. لكن الانصهار حصل. يعني so I believe we should gain confidence in saying, let us look at what we have accomplished. Let us look at what the benefits are. People don't know the benefits that come from this mixing. بعدين الناحية يعني when you see the extent to which the Sudanese from the north accept the Muslims of Malaysia, of يعني Iran, of يعني حتى الهند ويعني Pakistan, there's Muslims بدون فرق. لكن when you look at the black African Muslims, there's still a sense that these people are يعني ما مسلمين حقيقيين يعني. I once had a conversation with a close friend who was a very well-known character. Had even been the vice chancellor of the University of Khartoum and then became ambassador كده. We were conversing. قلت له يا أخي حاجة غريبة جدا كونه دولة 90% مسلمين يختاروا زعيم يكون رئيس من أكبر الشخصيات المعروفة في أفريقيا بزعامته. How do you explain that? طبعا I was talking about Senegal, was Senghor, who is a Christian, elected by 90% of the country that is Muslim. فقال لي حاجة غريبة جدا. قال لي يا أخي دين ما مسلمين، دين ما عندهم أي فكرة عن الإسلام. I said this to a Senegali foreign minister who responded by saying استغفر الله العظيم. يعني he was shocked that a Muslim would say they are not Muslims enough. How do you explain that? It's racism, quite bluntly. If you can accept all these Asian Muslims as Muslims, even though they don't speak Arabic, and you deny your African, citizen of being truly Muslim because they don't speak Arabic, because they're not culturally Arabized, then عنصرية. So I think what we need to do is to know more of one another, get to know one another. يعني لولا الحرب, if it were not this war now, and Northern Sudanese began to go to Juba and spend holidays in Juba, الجنوبيين منفتحين أكثر للشمال. يعني when you have delegations from Sudan to South Sudan and you listen to speeches being made, يعني our concept of one country, two systems has been turned first by Bashir and now everybody to two people in one nation, one people in two nations. لأنه الجنوبيين انفتحوا لأشياء بتربطوا مع الشمال, and the benefits they have acquired through cross-cultural fertilization. يعني ما عندي أي شك, on a personal level, I have been immensely enriched by the combination of my Southern Sudanese cultures and what I have come to learn from my Northern Sudanese associations and assimilation. لكن it is a give and take. And I wish Abdullah was able to participate, because the things he says about my book, Cry of the Owl, and how it opened his eyes to some of the positives of the culture and the extent to which people are ignorant of one another. Let us get to know one another. And if we do, I think we will see that there's a lot we can learn from one another to be mutually enriching. وبعدين I feel very confident that we have made a lot of progress and we could make more progress. Let us bring peace. Let us bring everybody to the table, and then they will learn. And I had a meeting with المثقفين الإسلاميين, young people with higher degrees, and I was invited to give them a talk. At first I thought, what should I say to them? They know me and I know them. Lakin when we talked, I asked them, يا جماعة, and I respect that you are searching for a genuine Sudanese state. وتخلص من الآثار الاستعمارية وكذا. This is all good. لكن what do you do with those who are not Muslims if you want to create one country? And the conversation went on in a way that was very, very, to me, constructive. and I said the same. يا جماعة خلاص كلنا سودانيين. لكن what will unite us? You cannot unite us by taking one religion and impose it on the nation. يعني simplified response to your question. أنا متفائل لكن عايز شغل وعايز نتعارف وكده. في أيادي أخلي الناس يتكلموا قبل ما
ندي
ممكن
إيمان
أواصل.
بلدو، بعدين بنجي للناس اللي أخذوا فرصة قبل كده، فنمشي لإيمان بلدو. إيمان.
شكرا جزيلا يا دكتور ضياء. شكرا يا دكتور فرانسيس. Dr. Francis, nice to see you again. I just wanted
Good to see
to start with a prelude and an exercise so that you can determine for us the parameters and ingredients of what الهوية means in this case. When we were trying to do something with the CPA, I'm trying to bring you, remember الوحدة الجاذبة, as if it can happen in 6 years, and the exercise that one party of the table in the negotiations wanted 10 years, the other wanted 2, then they divided the sum by 2 and they said that is 6 years. The travesty and the mediocrity of that exercise brought us to a very bad encounter when John Garan, Allah yarhamu, and Masur Khad, Allah yarhamu, they came here with Ali Usman, 2004, they were on their way to Norway. We went through many exercises, through so many British think tanks and academia and right, hands of the foreign office here. All the Sudanese were put on one part of the room from the south. The rest are depicted as northerners. You remember the Muslim Arab oppressor of the north? That was the binary of how the conflict was identified and analyzed, then leading to the outcome of what is the, informing kind of parameter of what is happening to our two Sudans. They didn't want us to go to Norway, but we actually found our own way because they only funded the people from Southern Sudan. We went to Norway. We were not allowed to go into the room, but we insisted. Then I wanted to just ask Dr. John Garam one question. When you actually say that we're going to have Arabic as not the first language of the South, you started by only identifying the language as one kind of defining factor of a nation. What are you going to do with all the people from South Sudan in the north inside the whole room and with the cameras? And this is something on the record. He said, nobody from Southern Sudan who is in the educational system in the north is going back to the south. On the spot, they are not going. So now tell me.
Sorry, nobody from South Sudan is.
The people in the schooling system, they are going to continue in Arabic because you cannot transplant them in another system in English, because now English is deemed the, kind of the language of the new state. So that is fine. Then I had my own kind of brother from the south, our neighbor. He was in high school in Khartoum. He was very athletic and very, very talented. He went to the Dawra al-Madrasiyya, then he was actually dismissed. He came to me and he said, Iman, you go with me because you are my sister and guardian. I don't have anybody with me in the north. We went. Everybody in the school said, no, you are not from the south. This guy is from the south. He said, no, it is me, the person who is defining my relationship with a northerner as my way. It is not the politician or the CPA or the UN in Nairobi in December 2024 or any kind of think tank who defined what is the هوية, why are we going to solve المشكلة بتاعت الشمال والجنوب in this way. When a voice from the ground of the person who will say أنا سوداني, دي جارتي, دي أختي, دي whatever. So in this respect, أنا كنت مولودة في الجنوب زي ما أنت عارف والحاجات كلها عشناها في الجنوب. أنا سودانية شمالية ولا أنا الهوية بتاعتي شنو؟ وزميلي الدخل بعد ذاك الأسبلي جاري قال أنا وليد أمره ومات في أسبلي في الحرب الجنوبي بعد ما هو مات انفصلت الدولة. ممكن توريني إكسرسايز أنا ممكن الهوية بتاعتي بتكون شنو؟ شكرا.
شكرا. هشام. هشام. طيب هشام ما سامع انك، ممكن تخش محمد القاضي. واضح، نعم.
طيب شكرا للفرصة وتحياتي لكم كلكم. دكتور فرانسيس، أنا بس عندي وجهة نظر كده بحب إنه لو تجاوبني عليها. أنا I think يعني إنه ال identity in Sudan was neither يعني ما هي المشكلة. أنا بفتكر إنه the problem يعني the moment it entered politics. أنا حسب اللي شايفه إنه in societies that succeeded in state building, identity is managed within a natural legal framework. Thus, it remains an element of cultural and social definitions, not a tool for political mobilization, if you like. Whereas in Sudan, identity was injected into politics before the state was fully formed, and before a consensus on the meaning of citizenships was reached. لذلك identity shift from realm of mutual recognition to a weapon in the struggle for power and legitimacy. Here the sin lies not in recognizing identity, but in their premature brutalization within a fatal institutional vacuum. فبس اذا الكلام ده واضح، حابب بس ترد لي على النقطه دي. وشكرا for having me here وتحياتي لكم كلكم.
شكرا.
شكرا جزيلا يا بروف، شكرا لكم كلكم. وانا اشتغل بنصيحتك يا دكتور واتكلم بالعربي لانه المذر تانك، ما اكرر الغلطه بتاعت الزول السكرتير بتاعت السيد الوزير. والله الحقيقه انت ذاتك يا بروفيسور فرانسيس بتتكلم عربي وانجليزي احسن من اي زول. احسن عربي غايته احسن من عربي ديفينتلي. وذكرني بزميلنا، واحد زميلنا كان معنا في الحزب الشيوعي رحمه الله عليه، ودكتور عبد السلام عكاشه، بيتكلم انجليزي وعربي ودينكا فلوينتلي. انا سالت واحد صديق لي دينكاوي، قلت له يا اخي الزول ده عنده اكسنت؟ قال لي والله ما عنده اكسنت. فواضح انك ما بتكون عندك برضه اكسنت في كل اللغات الثلاثه دي. شكرا لك يا بروف.
شكرا. شكرا.
طيب انا دارين مساعدتك. أنا هنا واحد من ضحايا التعذيب وبنناضل من فترة طويلة جدا عشان نوقف الجريمة زي دي وما تتكرر، وكيف نتعامل مع المرحلة الجاية. المسألة بتاعت الشغل دي واحد بتكون عارف أنت الحتة زي دي بتحصل عليك وعلى أهلك وعلى قبيلتك، خاصة في أيام مذبحة الضيعين حصل كثير شديد جدا. الجرج اللي انتوا الزول شايله جواه دي موجوده بشكل بكثره باي زول مره ببيت الاشباح، وهو اي زول مره طبعا طالع من الحرب دي في سجون الدعم السريع او سجون الانقاذ. كيف نتعامل مع الحته زي؟ كيف نقنع الناس انه يا جماعه بدلا من استمرار القتل والمساء زي ده نوقف الموت للناس التانيين حوالينا اللي بنحبهم ونحن ما ده. وفي نفس اللحظه أن ما ننسى المحاسبه مهمه جدا. الناس كلها بتتكلم عن كارلوس مينين في الأرجنتين في أيام لما استلم هو الحكم، لأنه هو كان واحد من ضحايا النظام السابق العسكري. ويقول لك ده الحل الوحيد اللي هو نقدم عفو لهم الناس، لكن إنه نحاسبهم ليتر أون. فالحتة زي دي دارين نصيحة لك إن جنرال، كيف نمرق من الحتة زي دي الجرج زي جوانا زي دي، ودارين زي ما بقول للناس انا مات والله ما اقدر ارتاح، ما عندي مشكله. مشكلتي انا من الناس المعذبه والمجروحه جسديا ومجروحه نفسيا. كيف نمر بهم وحاولوا يتخلصوا بالحته زي دي؟ شكرا يا بروف.
شكرا.
تفضل يا سامر.
شكرا على الفرصة. أنا صراحة استحضرت حاجة بمناسبة موضوع الافريقانية بتاعت السودانيين وجذرنا الافريقي. قبل فترة انا علقت في جروب نحن هنا فيه، قلت انا كنت بتفرج في المباراة بتاعت السنغال، مباراة الكاس بتاعت السنغال والمغرب. وطبعا اي زول ممكن يقول لك المذيع ممكن يكون هو اذا مغربي مثلا بيكون عنده عاطفة للمغاربة، لكن انا لاحظت انه مثلا المذيع ممكن يكون مصري، ممكن يكون من اي جنسيه تانية، لانه قناه البين سبورت دي قطريه. بقى في تركيز بصوره كبيره جدا انه حتى كاس الامم الافريقيه اللي هو بين فرق افريقيه يقولوا نحن وهم. لما يتكلموا عن الفريق العربي يقولوا نحن، ولما يتكلموا عن الفريق الافريقي زي السنغال اللي هي هسه يتكلم عن انه في نسبه كبيره بتاعت مسلمين، يقوم يقول هم. وفي التحليل بتاع المباراه ما يديك اي معلومات. يعني احنا كنا بنحضر كاس الامم الافريقيه ده بيدوك معلومات عن اللعيبه الافارقه دي، ده بيلعب في الفريق الفلاني وده كان بيلعب من الفريق حاليا بقى في نوع من التعريب لكل الفرق يعني القريبه للشرق الاوسط، تعريب كبير جدا، ومن ضمنها السودان، وتعريب غصبا عننا في انه انتوا عرب ولاعبين مع ناس اجانب كانهم ناس غريبين عنكم. فدي بقروشهم، يعني حتى لانه القطريين بقروشهم بيسيطروا. طبعا بقت حقوق النشر، حقوق البث يعني مكفوله للجزيره الرياضيه. فحتى ما في نوع من العداله ذاته في التحليل بتاع المباراه ولا في الاذاعه بتاعت المباراه. دي بس على جانب الرياضي، بس ناهيك عن الجوانب الثانيه. شكرا جزيلا.
Do you want to respond or we continue with more questions?
No, please, I can respond quickly and then we look for more questions. Or if you want, I don't know how much time we have, if you want the rest of the questions to come, and then I answer them all at once. لو في أسئلة.
Let us have Hussein Hamid.
كويس. حسين حامد سامع line closed. Okay, there's
حسين حامد ready. Okay, طارق.
شكرا جزيلا مرة أخرى دكتور ضياء. شكرا بروفيسور فرانسيس. سؤالي أنا هنا في مستقبل دولة الجنوب. دولة الجنوب أنا والله كنت أسعد الناس بقرار الانفصال ده، وافتكر إنه هو حل على الأقل جزئي، لأنه في ناس من الشمال ممكن يلقوا وطنهم في الجنوب يعني، ولكن الناس كانوا في حالة تخوف. في ناس متشائمين وفي ناس بيتمنوا إنه الدولة تفشل، وفي ناس متأثرين للظروف اللي مرت بها. فتصوراتك لمستقبل دولة الجنوب على الأقل ترتفع لمستوى الدولة الأفريقية اللي عبرت بعد أن تخلصت من الأمراض اللي موجودة في الشمال. النموذج اللي قلته في إجابتك في تعليقك عن السنغال، ده ما الإسلام الصحيح بتاع السنغال، ده الإسلام الخالي من الدم العربي، ده هو أفضل إسلام في الحقيقة. وافتكر الإسلام في الجنوب برضه بيكون بنفس المستوى بتاع الإسلام بتاع السنغال. شكرا جزيلا.
شكرا. ممكن دكتور فرانسيس you can respond now.
شكرا جزيلا. المداخلات كلها مهمة جدا، والحقيقة يعني I agree with most of the questions, even the implication of the questions. إيمان تسأل what is my identity. الحقيقة يعني my own observation is that identity is what you think gives you the most in terms of enhancement of your own self-esteem and the way you are seen by others. In many ways, people adapt. Yani when Africans are in the Western world, they do not talk about being from this country or even this ethnic group or kida. They talk about being Africans, because This is a measure of being an African representing the total continent. بعدين يعني interestingly enough, there was a time when my father took me to go and translate among there were some cases among the Arabs themselves, al-Masiriya leaders on both sides. And my father was a mediator, and he asked me to go and be, and معاه طبعا his مشايخ وعمد وكده. So he asked me to translate, and I translated. One of the Arabs said to my father, ولدك بقى عربي. يعني this is an enhancement, this is a praise. يعني I have become an Arab. بعدين عمل بابو نمر لما الدينك والمسيرية شاكلوا، وأنا مشيت مع الباغر، مشيت من أبيي ومنا للمجلد، وعمل الناظر بابو نمر قاعد مع النظار والمشايخ بتاعين نوم. فقلت له يا عم الناظر you have been to the Arab world، زرت مشيت بلاد عربية، بالله أشكالهم هناك كيف؟ أشكالهم كيف؟ قال لي حمر. قلت له طيب كده عاين لناسكم ديل، لونكم ده جاي من وين؟ ما ده اختلاط بينكم وبين أهلكم اللي بتقول عليهم جنجة دينكا. يا جماعة أنتوا أهل and you don't know that you are brothers. You are denying one another. So I think, yeah, and it is a question of how you, what benefits you find in being in a particular area. Yani, what you consider yourself is important is the key. And then the next is how people see you. And that depends also on the way you relate to others. Okay. Yani, I do think that Sudanese, if they only get to know more of one another, they would see that اللي بيجمعهم أكثر من اللي بيفرقهم. لكن the question which goes to the question raised by how do we make people, how do we persuade them to create a framework of unity and equality? This one مهم جدا لأنه it is a psychological case. والمشكلة في إنه for some reason the Africans have not really been present in the Sudan. Yani when you hear Ghana being talked about as the first African country to be independent, what does that mean? It means that we are being dismissed as not Africans enough. Sudan was the first sub-Saharan Africa to be independent. And yet people talk of Ghana as the first. معناتها we have not become fully accepted by the Arab. نفس الشيء بالنسبة للعالم العربي. السودانيين بيمشوا هناك. كان عندي زميل في خرطقة اسمه عبد الرجال، مشي يقرأ في لبنان، رجع ولونه يعني أخضر زي ما بيقولوا. قال لي أوعك تقولي تاني أنا عربي. I have nothing to do with that. كثير من السودانيين بيمشوا لبلاد عربية. They experience discrimination. And then here Africans, you don't relate to them to become known and proud of being the first African country to be independent and the largest African country on the continent before we separated. I think there's a lot to do with our getting to know one another. أنا الحاجة اللي حاصل دلوقتي السودانيين الكتار المشوا لبلاد عربية مثلا كلاجئين وكذا ونازحين. They're discovering that they're more African than they had thought. And they're having a very good time relating to Africans, accepted. لو بقى اللون كثير من الأفارقة لونهم زي لون السودانيين. بعدين بنص في حاجة جديدة أنا أفتكر يعني I had no time to talk about it, لكن there is a need for a genuine African state that builds on the realities of the continent. What is happening now in West Africa with Niger or Mali or Burkina Faso is a search for an African, genuinely African state. Constitutionalism is externally based. We've been talking about Africanizing the constitutional systems of Africa, which are mostly Morusa. But then how do you deal with managing identity conflicts? عندنا النموذج بتاع رواندا وبوروندي رواندا بعد الإبادة الجماعية they have now almost by law dictated we're all Rwandese. ما تتكلم عن توتسي هوتو ولا توا. It's almost a جريمة to talk about your tribe. تمشي لبروندي. Burundi is the same composition of identities زي رواندا. لكن Burundi is taking a different approach. نعترف بالواقع إنه عندنا اختلاف، عندنا تنوع. كيف نتعامل مع التنوع دي؟ What divides is not the differences, it's the way we manage our differences. And this comes to the point made by يعني أفتكر كان يعني سامر. يعني it's not the fact that we are different tribes that create problems, it's tribalism. It's not racial differences that is the problem, it's racism. And it is a question of religion is not a difference, it's religious bigotry, وتعصب الديني. So if we really want to prioritize our unity, we have to ask ourselves, how do we accept one another? And the problem is how you manage diversity. And I witnessed this all over in the world where there are problems of identity, conflicts. It's a question of exclusion. Most countries create a framework where you are either the first-class citizen and the others are marginalized or excluded. The challenge is, how do you manage diversity to be equitable and inclusive and all that? أتذكر تكلمت مع وكيل أول مرة نتكلم لما كنا بنتفاوض في إيجاد solution of the problem of Sudan. قال لي يا أخي جون جرين بيتكلم عن السودان الواحد، عايز يوحد السودان. What is the basis of this unity؟ قال يا أخي نحن عشنا في السودان وجدنا العرب بتاعنا النيل ديل الفيرست كلاس سيتيزنز، الغرباويين ديل برغم انهم يعني مسلمين لا زال الافارقه يعتبروا سكند كلاس سيتيزن. نحن الاجانب في بلدكم من اثيوبيا واريتريا we come as third class citizens. الجنوبيين come as fourth class citizens. How can you be in a country where you are a fourth class citizen? قربت اقول له الفلات اللي بيجوا من غرب السودان غرب افريقيا ديل من نيجيريا وكذا those are the fourth class citizens. الجنوبيين fifth class citizens. معقول يا اخي تكون في بلد يعني where you are treated like a fifth class citizen? No. So the challenge is, how do we manage diversity? And I think if we ask the right questions, are there Sudanese who do not want country united? ما أظن. يا أخي حتى الجنوب لما الجنوب انفصل والله العظيم لما كنت هناك and I'm watching الفرح بتاع الجنوبيين طلعوا في الحر وكده كده يرقصوا ويغنوا كده. Part of me felt good for them because they've achieved what they had. But part of me felt sad that we had betrayed our sense of the large unity. ظلمنا أنفسنا. نرجع يا أخي نطلع من البلد بربع البلد الجميل وكده؟ لا. جون جران بيعتبر إنه أنا سوداني ويعتز بسودانيته. The same question applies if we ask the right questions. يا جماعة كده نقعد كلنا. هل في زول ما عايز السودان يكون واحد؟ ما أظن. واللي بيقول كده ده ما بيستحق حصل الناس يستمعوا له. طيب إذا كان نحن متفقين إنه عايزين السودان يكون واحد، الأساس بتاع السودان الواحد شنو؟ الإطار شنو؟ أنا بفتكر إنه مبدئيا الناس حيتفقوا إنه المساواة بتاع الوطنية is the basis, it's important. How we achieve it can be a question of degree ولا زمن وكده، لكن كمبدأ الناس يتفقوا عليه. بعد نقعد there are things you can do legally to entitle everybody to equality. And then it is a process that cannot be totally achieved within a short frame of mind. لكن المبدأ يكون مقبول. الممارسة maybe it might take time. أنا شخصيا I grew up born in a situation where I felt very different حتى من الجنوبيين منها للشمال. دلوقتي I don't feel any problem belonging to both Sudan and South Sudan. It is possible. لكن what is important is you have to feel that the identity you are associating with is enriching. You don't join an identity when you are deprived. والدنا جدنا روب كوالا روب وحتى روب بيوم اللي هو أبو جدنا المشي المهدي خلط الدم with his counterpart المسيري عشان يكونوا واحد. ما غيروا الدين، ما غيروا اللون، ما غيروا الثقافة. ظلوا الدينكا والمسيري لكن خلطوا الدم قالوا نكون أخوان. وأخوتهم دي امتدت للقبائل so that the tribes live in peace. كوالا روب نفس الشيء. الوالد جوج وبابو نمر قال نحن حلفنا نكون أخوان. وبابو يقول إنه العلاقات بين الزعماء بتاع العشائر this is what laid the foundation for peace in the country. علاقته مع القبائل بتاع الرزيقات ومنها للفور وكده، علاقته مع قبائل الجنوب، علاقته مع الدينكا طبعا يعني موك رابطين الشمال مع الجنوب. الوالد دايما جو كان بيقول أنا الإبرة والخيط اللي بيربط الشمال مع الجنوب للتوب، يكون توب واحد. Why did they choose when they were given the choice by the British to join the South or stay in the North? They chose to stay in the North. Why? Because they found some benefits in being seen in that context. والمعاملة كانت معاملة جيدة جدا إلا بعد الاستعمار مشى والبلد دخلت في حروب ومنطقة بيي بقت يعني identified مع الجنوب. العلاقات الودية اللي كانت موجودة والصلات اللي كانت موجودة بقت تتفرتك. سوء المعاملة. أنا قلت للنميري أبيي wants to join the South مش because of حب للجنوبيين من الناحية العنصرية وكذا ولا كراهية للشمال، لكن because المعاملة اللي فيه يعني اضطهاد وكده. حتى النميري قال لي يا أخي أنا ما بقى أي سوداني يضطهد، ودخلنا في كيف نخلق بيت تكون منطقة تربط الشمال والجنوب وكده. الناس يلقوا فايدة في الهوية اللي طارحينها. If it is going to be discriminatory, why should you be part of it? So I think the first step is to sit and air out these differences. كل زول عنده قضية، عشان كده دخل في الحرب. نستمع لهم. الناس المخربين المجرمين اللي دورهم دور يعني بارز في التخريب هيحاسبوا، لكن في طرق للمحاسبة وكده. لكن لو من بدري جدا تقول أنت ارتكبت جرائم ما في مجال لك في السودان الواحدة، طيب why would he want peace? He will continue to fight. So let us create a framework where people can feel unity is to their benefit, is enriching. التنوع مصدر خير. It is a source of enrichment, not division. أنا آسف to get carried away, لكن I thought I should just give this broad answer to the good questions that were raised. I'm still open to any questions if you have time. شكرا.
مشكلة ثانية صندوق. مشكلة ثانية.
الو سامع منك. unmute.
He was unmuted and now muted again.
اوكي
سامعني؟
ايوه.
اوكي، السلام عليكم. شكرا لجروب المعرفة وشكرا لاخونا البروفيسور الباحث فرانسيس دينق. معكم حسين حامد من تنسيقية مغامرة ولاية نيوجيرسي. عندي بس 3 أسئلة بسيطة لأستاذنا فرانسيس دينق. السؤال الأول إنه يعني ملخص كلامك تقريبا كله إنه السودان بيواجه identity crisis، لكن identity crisis دي مش عمقة وجزرة المؤسسة العسكرية الفاسدة إنه يعني دائما حكمت السودان 58 سنة. ما تعتقد إنه ده السبب؟ السؤال الثاني، ما هو رأيك في مستقبل السودان مع الحرب دي؟ وما هو رأيك في تحالف تأسيس بتاع ناس حميتي، هل حينجح ولا ما حينجح ولا الحكاية دي؟ والسؤال الثالث والأخير،
إنه المصالحة سنة 77 ما كانت البذرة على سنو نمير فرتق اتفاقية أديس أبابا. والسؤال تاني، عندي سؤال تاني. أنا سمعت في كلام كده رايح إنه النميري الترابي هو اللي قال لنميري يغفر اتفاقية أديس أبابا دي، لأنه السلطة في الجنوب بقت أعلى من الشمال. وشكرا جزيلا، السلام عليكم.
فرانسيس، ما في آية تانية مرفوعة ممكن؟
والله يعني أرد على الأسئلة دي تقريبا يعني وارد في كلام اللي قلنا. أول حاجة يعني when it comes to the question of the military زي ما قلت قبلك because of inability of either the civilians or the army to solve the problem من جذورها, that is why we keep alternating. يعني نميري أقصد عبود was given the power by his Ummah because they were about to lose electoral vote. So they assumed that Abud would do for them what they could not do through civilian rule. طبعا أول ما مسك السلطة يعني the military become يعني الطموح في السلطة grows, and so they become يعني military dictatorship. They were supposed to implement the agenda and to defeat the southern rebels. They did not. And the same applied when Mahmoud Ahmed Mahjoub came to power. He took a tough line against the South, thinking he would defeat them. They did not. So the power was taken up again by Nimeri. Nimeri found a solution, which he thought was tactical. زي ما قال ما كنا جادين في حل المشكلة بتاعت أديس أبابا بالاتفاقية، بس قلنا الاتفاقية نخلي الجنوبيين ياخذوا سلاحهم ونشرد الاتفاقية وكده. عايز أقول إنه التبادل أو alternation between the civilian and the army is partly responsible of both sides بالمناسبة. يعني ما ممكن نقول إنه المسؤولية كلها يعني responsibility اللوم بيقع على العساكر. زي ما قال الترابي العساكر عملوا شيء ما قدرنا نعمله نحن بطريقة مدنية. So we need to solve the problem from the roots, because unless we do that, we are not going to get rid of this alternation between the military and the civilian rules وكده. بعدين يعني أنا ما بقدر أعلق على هل التأسيس will succeed or not, لكن all this is still a search for the soul of the country. يعني حتى حميتي ما بدأ يعني كجزء من الجانجويد، ولما هو يعني took over تخلص من الرابطة مع الجانجويد وبقى جزء من الجيش. ومن الجيش أنا لما مشيت الخرطوم قبل 6 شهور قبل الحرب وقابلناه، هو قال ما في السودان، البلد فرتقت. طيب اللي حيجيب السودان باك شنو؟ قال حوار على أساس شنو؟ يعني مشاركة بالسلطة وثروات، ولا عندكم رؤية للسودان؟ قال لي عدالة. أنا فسرت يعني عدالة قريب للسودان الجديد بتاع inclusivity, equality and dignity for all وكده. معناتها حتى الحميتية اللي عنده ماضي في دارفور وفي حاجات حاصلة تحت يعني الثورة بتاعته، المجازر اللي حاصل دي وكل الخراب وكده، لكن برضو عنده جانب which is appealing to all the Sudanese. إن عايزين نخلق السودان of عدالة والتهميش، نتخلص من التهميش وكده كده. معناتها there is something there to be listened to. ناس الجيش بيمثلوا طبعا الأوريجينال establishment and therefore a sovereignty بتاع nation. البرهان لسه يعني بيحضر اجتماعات بتاعت الأمم المتحدة، معناته you can't dismiss that either. وطبعا الأحزاب وخاصة يعني الطالبين المدنية بتاعهم their position is a very valid position that's highly known. أنا موقفي إنه يا أخوانا نستمع لكل الناس ونطرح السؤال إيه الإطار اللي بيكون مقبول لكل السودانيين عشان نحقق الوحدة الجاذبة لكل السودانيين. And then you come to يعني نميري ما أعرف قالوا طبعا أنا قلت نميري entered Addis Ababa as a tactic. And then when he saw الجنوبيين جادين في إنه يحكموا أنفسهم ويطالبوا كمان بحقوقهم within the federal setup, that's when he began to be disappointed وعايز يتخلص من الاتفاقية وكده. So we are searching, it's a nation in painful search of itself. We have not yet come with الإطار اللي بيجمع. وبصراحة جون جرانغ had that vision. وبطريقة متواضعة بعض أفكاري وكتب تحتي كنا متفقين أنا وهو في تصورنا للسودان الجديد. عشان كده while I appreciated that the independence of the South was a failure to achieve a framework of unity, if we accept that, then it means that we have to create a framework that will make the Sudan that has remained now see something in common. بعدين يا جماعة يعني if you begin to identify people and you exclude them even before you come to some agreement, why do you expect them to accept your unity? بعدين there is no clean hand. All these generals have been involved in wars, جنوب السودان ودارفور وكذا كذا. And زي ما بقول in equity, nobody comes to justice with unclean hands. طيب, if all our hands are not clean, ما خلاص نقعد, how do we wash our hands? بعدين إذا كان في تطرف ما في مجال للمساومة معهم, it will then become obvious. And then that can be dealt with. التانيين الإطار بتاع Truth and Reconciliation of South Africa وقتشاتشا بتاع رواندا والأفريكان system ذاته. Africa has a way of reconciling يعني peacemaking with محاسبة وكده. Let us discuss it in the African Sudanese way. So I think it is better to err on inclusivity and equality for all. Otherwise, where do you end? Today it will be يعني فصل الجنوب, فصل Darfur, Nuba Mountains is already almost moving on in its own way. Where will it end? It won't end. بعدين زي ما الجنوب ورانا دلوقتي, الجنوب بيكون مقسمة. الدينق بيقول العرب زي جنوب السودان. ويعني زي ما قال واحد من زعماء الشمال, قال ال SPLM is a Dinka movement. القبائل الثانية ما حتقبلها, which is divisive. SPLM should be accepted as a uniting framework for South Sudan. المهم الرد الشامل وبسيط, inclusivity, equality of citizenship and dignity for all بدون أي تمييز. أنا شايف يد فوق هناك برضو.
في نصر الدين القاضي عنده مداخلة, ممكن تخش يا نصر الدين.
شكرا جزيلا دكتور فرانسيس. يعني سبحان الله, العقلية بتاعت العساكر بيقروا من نفس الكتاب. يعني ذكرك لتجربة نميري وإنه كان مفتكر الاتفاقية بتاعت أديس أبابا ممكن تمشي على الجنوبيين, والأمر بعد 2-3 سنين الأمر ينتهي على كده. نفس الشيء بالملي اللي عملوا البرهان واللجنة الأمنية لما قالوا للمدنيين خلاص كونوا حكومتكم واعملوا كل شيء. وانس ابتدوا يتعاملوا باحترافية إنه كل المال العام يكون تحت إدارة المالية, يعني وصلوا طرف الصوت رفعوا يدهم, قالوا الجماعة ديل دخلوا في بذكر المثال الحي ده يا دكتور فرانسيس. ما شايف في صعوبة في إنه الاعتراف بحكومة الأمر الواقع من خلال اللجنة الأمنية أو القبضة الأمنية بتاعت البرهان، وإنه ممثل في الأمم المتحدة وكذا وكذا وكذا، مع احترامنا للبروسيس كلها. أنا متفق معاك اتفاق تام في إنه الهوية وعلاج السودان يكون في البروسيس اللي ذكرته، ولكن ألا تجد إنه في صعوبة الآن تكرار العسكر والعقلية هي؟ شكرا جزيلا.
شكرا يا مفروضين.
شكرا. الحقيقة يعني نحن برضو لازم نعترف بواقع ثاني، وهو دور الفورن إيلمنتس والاندفاع بتاعهم شنو. لو مسكنا الدول العربية، طبعا الأفارقة زي بعيدين شوية، حتى لما يتكلموا في الاتحاد الإفريقي والإغاد وكده كده ما عندهم دور فعال. وبعدين السودانيين بكل صراحة ما شايفين كده يعني فائدة ملموسة يعني تربطهم مع أفريقيا، لأن الأفارقة ما لاعبين دور. And I don't really know what they would offer, but they are not even trying to do something that Sudanese can feel they belong to Africa. العرب جايين دلوقتي they are divided among themselves also. معناتها الدوافع بتاع العرب اختلفت من الماضي. الماضي هو الرابطة الدينية، الإسلام والثقافة، اللغة وكذا كذا. دلوقتي دخلت عناصر ثانية اللي هي يعني طموحات في ثروة السودان أو الجيوبوليتيكال alliances أو maybe دور الدين وكده. what do we do to deal with these questions? We have to also sit مع الأجانب ديل. What exactly are they after? أنا ما أعرف how we deal with the priorities. هل نتفق بيناتنا في الأول وبعدين نواجه الأجانب، ولا نتكلم على الأجانب عشان نقلل الدور المخربين اللي عندهم موتيفز مختلفة من المسؤولين. فالمسألة تعقد جدا جدا، لكن we cannot say the situation is too complex ونرفع أيدينا. We must define the problem in a way that is manageable so that we can do something, because doing nothing is not an option. فالسؤال الحقيقة بنقدر نفهم how an identity of Sudan evolved historically. بنقدر نفهم الصراعات اللي حسا موجودة في السودان نتيجة للآثار التاريخية من الناحية العنصرية، التعصب الديني، الناحية الثقافية وكذا كذا. لكن do we understand the identity of them? What is it they are after? We need to understand also. So I think we need to be on a process of بحث وتحليل، وفي نفس الوقت نضع الإطار السياسي البوليسي oriented framework for حوار المنتج واللي بيأدينا للسودان. لأنه everybody wants peace. Everybody wants unity of Sudan to be preserved. The question is how? And that's where we need to talk, and I think you cannot find the how without الإطار الشامل للحوار. Let everybody air what they're killing for, what they're risking their lives for. تكون خطوة لاتجاه ونكون واضحين في الفيجن، a vision of inclusive equality. يا أخوانا الحكمة بتاعت الكبار الأسس السودان لما قالوا الدين لله والوطن للجميع. What is wrong with that? This is many countries in Africa are Islamic. لكن religion is not dividing them. Our Christian religion is not dividing them. Yes, it is true there are تيارات ممكن تقسم الناس، لكن في يعني ثوابت which are recognized as overriding وكده. ما بنقدر نقول إنه القصة كلها تقع على العساكر. العساكر جزء في المجتمع بتاع الناس اللي عايزين a particular vision for the country, and then they use عساكر to pursue that vision. أول ما يمسكوا السلطة العساكر يطمعوا في السلطة. They don't want to give it up. So it's a complex situation. لكن لازم نبسط الأمور ونوضح رؤيتنا للسودان والحيودينا للغاية دي شنو. and we begin to talk. It is a process. وكده.
ندي فرصة أخيرة لإمام بلدو بعدها نختم إن شاء الله. دكتور فرانسيس.
يا دكتور فرانسيس، انت قلت كلام جميل جدا انه الناس اللي بتتخذ القرارات هم so called نخب. I don't know the definition بتاع الحاجة شنو، او العساكر او السياسيين على مر العصور. في السودان نحن محتاجين برضو لدور تاني يا دكتور فرانسيس دينغ. I would like to know whether you agree. الثقافة والأدب، اللغة العربية زي ما قال نجوغو ثيونغو إنه الاستعمار خلانا نكتب بالإنجليزي فور إكزامبل في حالته ككاتب كيني، لكن بدأ يرجع للغة بتاعته العادية. في عدد كبير جدا من السودانيين الأدباء والسودانيات
الله أكبر
تلا جيتان وبتكتب بالعربي مثلا. بالنسبة لك أنت كتبت طائر الشوم بالعربي. اللغة العربية لغة أفريقية دكتور فرانسيس. الأدباء السودانيين بتعرفهم على أفريقيتهم وبتعرفهم على إنه دي واحدة من أساسيات وجودهم إنه هم بيتكلموا بالعربي حتى لو في الشمال أو في الجنوب. إذا نحن قلت نشوف الناس البلد اللي عايزين مننا نشوف في بريطانيا مثلا عندك لجنة كل البرلمانيين باسمها السودان وجنوب السودان. دكتور البرامج اللي كانت اسمها السودان دلوقتي بتقول سودانز، يعني هم ستيل بيتعاملوا معانا كدولة واحدة. اللغة بتجي معانا كده عشان تندح الأشياء دي ونرجع على أفريقيتنا. دور الأدباء والكتاب والثقافة السودانية لما تقول العربي دولة أفريقية، في دولة أفريقية هي لغة أفريقية، بيكون دي واحدة من الأشياء ممكن المبادرات الكبيرة جدا ممكن تخلي الناس برضو تتعرف على إنه this is authentic. يعني العربية دي ما عندها علاقة بشمال السودان ولا لغة بتاعت استعمار، هي لغة للاثنين. يعني الثقافة هل عندها دور في الحتة دي غير العسكري يا دكتور والسياسيين؟
شكرا. قبل ما تجاوب دكتور فرانسيس دينغ، أنا بشكر إمام بلد في الطرح الأخير ده بالذات، لأنه كانت من ضمن الأسئلة وخايف الوقت ما يكفي فيها. I was wondering if Dr. Francis Deng can elaborate about the role of language in identity. لأنه it is really language is a very crucial. It's not that color. As we see Sudanese families, every family has all the dark and all colors of the, and is the language. And you go to Juba now, you go to Malakal, you go to all the South Sudan, you see one of the best things that came out of that Addis Ababa agreement time is the spread of the Arabic language. And now it is the preferred language in Juba, Arabic Juba. And this would be a fantastic thing that if it could be adopted, that Arabic be considered an African indigenous language, and it is actually African language. I mean, according to Abdullah Tayyib, that the origin of it came from Sudan, not the other way around. Thank you.
Thank you. Small correction, by the way. طائر الشوم بالعربي كتبه عبد الله النعيم. He's still here, and I hope hearing this. And by the way, his translation to Arabic is what made the book be known. يعني now I remember being at an airport and somebody approached me and said, "You look familiar. Who are you and what? Why do I recognize you?" Then I gave him my name. قال أنت كاتب طائر الشوم؟ يعني قربت أقول له ده عبد الله النعيم. طبعا I wrote it in English, and somebody commented in my writings that although Francis knows Arabic, he has written all his books in English. زي كأني رافض عربي، يعني عقدة ضد يعني the language. بالعكس يعني it is a question of efficiency and what do you think you can work with. لكن I believe very strongly in making the books available, and I think it was the Swiss who funded the translation of some of the books, and those are the books that are now known in the Sudan. Those in Arabic are known to a few who can read Arabic. لكن عايز أقول it's a chicken and egg question. لأنه if you Arabic to the dominance of those who identify themselves as Arabs and links us to the external world that is Arab, معناتها اللغة continues to be مصدر سيطرة. It continues to be a tool of domination. It will be rejected. Yani, I cannot believe that one of the prominent figures from Abyei, and we're discussing this question of the Abyei, the position of Abyei in regard to the North and South. And I was saying that the education system in Abyei should be dual, should be based on Arabic and English. الزول ده was مثقف كويس جدا متعلم كويس قال يا أخي Arabic is not accepted because we are part of South and the Constitution of South says English is language. تصور, you reject something that will enrich you, and why? Because he still sees Arabic as a symbol of the domination of those who call themselves Arabs. Yes, you have يعني the language is critically important. عشان كده I think we need to know الثقافات السودانية بشمولها بما فيها جنوب. Before we go to language, we need to know the cultures. Again, that's why I hope Abdullah was able to talk to us, because he finds that some of these books, particularly Cry of the Owl, is introducing us to another culture that we were dismissing. في واحدة يعني كتبت تعليق على الكتاب وقال this book is revealing to us part of the country that was غايبة, يعني that was unknown to us وكده. فأنا ما أعرف، ما عندي رد. يعني حتى عبد الله الطيب لما قال العروبة بدأت في السودان ونزحت لبلاد العرب، أنا شخصيا شعرت بأنه this is شطارة أكثر من اللازم. لأنه يعني how would the Arabs feel that عروبتهم دي جات من السودان في الوقت they look down on the Sudanese as non-Arabs. So we're creating a new front of صراع مع العالم العربي. There is يعني Swahili مثلا is an African language that evolved out of a mixing of African and Arabic and all that. There are many words in Swahili that are Arabic words. So I don't know the extent to which we can say Arabic is the language of the Africans. أنا أفتكر إنه نعترف بالواقع إنه جنوب السودان when we were fighting they took Arabic culture and all of that كجزء من الidentity بتاع الشمال which was controlling the north. As soon as you gave them their freedom انفتحوا لعروبة، انفتحوا لعربي، انفتحوا حتى لثقافات العربية وكده. لكن the political aspect was still a barrier بيناتهم. If we remove the political aspect, if we create a situation where يعني Arabic as a language, Islam as a religion, ثقافة بتاع العربية is not tied to a dominance of one group against another, then people will be open to it all and will be a source of mutual enrichment للبلد. الشماليين برضو هينفتحوا للغات الغير عربية في السودان. and يعني مرة بسمع ناس في this forum when we talk, I'll hear a voice of someone who speaks Dinka شمالي، وطبعا كثير من الجنوب بيتكلموا عربي وكده. So that is part of the coming together. بعدين اللغة بالمناسبة is more than just a means of communication. It's culture. التراث المبني على الثقافة بتاع القبيلة أو اللغة is very enriching. لما أترجم I come across certain Dinka words that I want to translate. I cannot find equivalent in English, but it's a very enriched word that says a lot. If we get to know these languages, حتى لو ما عرفنا كل اللغات، على الأقل ندرس بعض اللغات يعني that enjoy large numbers of people and make them common. Maybe not the national languages, but at least part, not the nation. بس يعني بصورة إنه this is a language endorsed as the language of the nation. But تكون لغات that can be a source of enrichment. بالاختصار, the question is what comes first? I think peace comes first. create a context of getting to know you. نتفاعل ونأثر على بعض، نفهم بعض. And then we will see all these as sources of enrichment and not to be rejected because of violence. So let's bring peace first and the rest will follow, inshallah.
Thank you very much, Dr. Francis Dehnk. Do you have any more concluding remarks you want to mention?
Wallahi, other than thanking you and thanking the revolution group, and the very word of revolution means that we need something radical, something transformative. So I really appreciate your attendance. I appreciate your patience. I appreciate you opening your minds to different points of view. I know that it has taken me most of my life has been a learning process. Getting to know قبائل في الجنوب, getting to know الشمال, ونعترف أن السودانيين الشماليين ذاتهم رغم أن their pride in being Arabs, they think highly of their tribes. لما نقول والقبائل, it's not simple, it's a مدح, لأن القبائل عندنا represent certain تقاليد, قيم, أخلاقيات نعتز بها. So I think even the Sudan that is calling itself Arab is also proud to have its own identities that are tribally based, and they are all struggling now to find a place. So let us create a place for all the Sudanese عشان يعتزوا بسودانيتهم, بقبائلهم, القيم بتاعت القبائل, and we create a nice omelette out of all this. Shukran.
Thank you very much. And thank you for mentioning our group. Revolution is actually support of revolution. And as they said, this is the revolution of enlightenment. ثورة وعي. That's what we hope for this group to continue its work. Thank you very much for everybody who's been here, and hope we can continue on the same topic again on other topics in the future. I leave now the platform to Dr. Taj Mahjoub.
شكرا كثير دكتور ضياء، وشكرا دكتور فرانسيس دينغ for the insightful and engaging talk. بنشكر برضو دكتور عبد الله النعيم، وإن شاء الله we'll have more session in the future إن شاء الله. Same topic. Thank you all for joining us today. Discussions like this are vital. They remind us of where we have been and help us better understand critical issues such as today's topic, identity crisis in Sudan, myths and reality. We are learning from those conversations and using the knowledge to help shape a better future for Sudan. Thank you all again. A wonderful rest of your day.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you للكل. مع السلامة.
عليكم السلام. شكرا.